You're going to hear that on October 5th of 2017, the victim in this case, Mr. Nicholis Wilcox, was bludgeoned to death with a hard object. His skull was crushed, and he had puncture wounds around his neck and his chest. And you're also going to hear that there's essentially three main players in this particular trial, that being the victim, Nicholis Wilcox, the second one being the defendant, Eric Robinson, and the third one being Isabella Tagliarini. Now, why do I say three main players? Because on August 23rd of 2017, all three of them were living in the same apartment, which is located at 7201 Northwest 15th Street in Plantation. Isabella Tagliarini was dating or together with Eric Robinson prior to him leaving to jail. You're going to hear that Eric Robinson was in the jail between August 23rd of 2017, and he got out that same year, October 3rd of 2017, and you're going to hear that the homicide occurred essentially 2 days later on October 5th of 2017. In the meantime, while Eric Robinson was in the jail, Isabella Tagliarini had a relationship with the other roommate, the decedent, Nicholis Wilcox, unbeknownst to Eric Robinson. Eric Robinson gets out of the jail, and he's picked up by his ex-girlfriend, Ms. Kensek, who drives him to the location of the homicide so he can pick up some of his things and his vehicle, which is a Cadillac, which was parked in front of the house. You're going to hear that Eric Robinson picks up some of his things, and one of the things he finds on the wall is a love note between Isabella Tagliarini and the decedent, Nicholis Wilcox. And it's a letter describing their love for each other, and it even has their fingerprints on it. Why is that important? That's important because after the homicide, that very same letter was found with Eric Robinson's personal effects at his girlfriend's house, Ms. Kensek. You're also going to hear that on October 5th, in the early morning hours, Isabella Tagliarini is awoken by Eric Robinson sitting on the bed, and he has his hand over her mouth, preventing her from screaming or talking. And you're going to hear that she hears Nicholis Wilcox gargling and struggling to breathe, and she sees something red. The defendant asks her to leave and goes back inside the bedroom and finishes off Nicholis Wilcox by bludgeoning him. You're also going to hear that both of them dispose of the body. It's wrapped in a tarp, which was already in the apartment. And you're going to hear that they drive all over Broward County. They drive to Publix, they drive to Big Lots, they drive to Home Depot to pick up things to paint the apartment because there's blood all over it. You're going to hear that they in fact drive with the victim's vehicle, which is a Ford F-150, to a Broward County dump, which has very good cameras. And you're going to hear that, and you can see the video of Eric Robinson driving the decedent's F-150, trying to get inside the dump, and then leaving the dump, asking for directions to the Everglades. And you're going to hear, and you're going to see testimony about the Southside Towers that were used by Isabella Tagliarini and Eric Robinson after the homicide. You're also going to hear that Isabella Tagliarini was arrested for her involvement in this particular crime. Not the homicide, but the fact that she helped Eric Robinson paint inside the apartment. And you're going to hear that she, in fact, became a state witness to describe what happened in that very apartment. You're also going to hear about DNA that was found inside the apartment linking Eric Robinson. You're going to hear about DNA linking Isabella Tagliarini. You might not like Isabella Tagliarini, but I proffer to you, she's not the one that killed the victim, Nicholis Tagliarini. you're going to hear that on the night of the homicide, Eric Robinson was living with his dead ex-girlfriend, Miss Kensek, and even though he had his vehicle, which is a Cadillac, dark in color, he chose to use her vehicle to go to the actual location. And you're going to hear testimony from neighbors who saw Eric Robinson around the F-150, which was now, at this point, backed up to the apartment where the homicide occurred, and him loading the body and other things inside the vehicle in the early morning hours of October 5th, 2017. You're going to hear that police were called, and you're going to hear that Ms. Tagliarini showed the police where the body was eventually dumped, which was 10065 Clearly Boulevard in Plantation. It's a Publix very close to the location of the homicide. You're going to also hear testimony and pictures of where the mattress was dumped and cut apart, bloodied, which was at the Del Oro Apartments, again, very close to the location of the homicide. And you're going to hear that Isabella Tagliarini voluntarily gave this information to the police. And after hearing the testimony of all the witnesses, I proffer to you, ladies and gentlemen, that you will find no trouble finding the defendant guilty of second-degree homicide. Thank you.
At this time, would the defense like to give an opening statement?
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So what the state just told you is their theory, right? That is their theory of what happened back on October 5th, 2017. You all will listen to the facts as they are presented, and you will decide what you believe happened on that day. Now, I want to start by talking about the presumption of innocence again, like we talked about last week, and like Judge Bober instructed you about last week, right? Many of you, when Judge Bober said, innocent until proven guilty, how many have heard that statement, right? You guys raised your hands, right? We've all heard that. Well, in a courtroom, a person charged with a crime is presumed innocent, right? It's this cloak of innocence that surrounds them. And it remains with them the entire time and through verdict, unless the state can overcome that presumption. And how do they do that, right? They do that by putting on evidence. Another thing you heard the court say last week was describing the burden of reasonable doubt, right? What is beyond and to the exclusion of a reasonable doubt? It's a very high burden. Right? I don't know if all of you remember. I know you got a lot of information in just a short amount of time. But in civil court, right, the burden is lower. Right? I think Judge Bober described it as a tipping of the scales. But in a criminal courtroom, beyond and to the exclusion of all reasonable doubts, is an extremely high burden that the state needs to overcome. So, what happened in this case is that Isabella Tagliarini killed her boyfriend, Nicholis Wilcox, and blamed it on her ex-boyfriend, Eric Robinson. You will hear that Eric Robinson was arrested by the Plantation Police Department immediately, based on what Isabella Tagliarini told them. The police rushed to judgment. They thought what they had at first was someone being honest and straightforward. Turns out Ms. Tagliarini's stories and statements and details kept changing. I submit to you that innocent bystanders do not act this way, that things would not have unfolded the way they did if she was not guilty of killing her boyfriend herself. Now, for starters, Mr. Sapak said to you a couple times, the police were called, the police got involved. Well, why is that, right? It's a very passive way of saying something. Well, that's because Ms. Tagliarini was not the one who reported that her boyfriend was killed. She then, in her web of men, called her ex-husband, Nick Tagliarini. We have two Nicks, so if I wind up saying Wilcox or Tagliarini, I apologize. I think Mr. Sabak even did the same, right? So she calls her ex-husband, Nicholis Tagliarini, and is telling him all this stuff, and then he calls the police. Why he calls the police and doesn't let Isabella call the police remains to be seen. But it's strange behavior for somebody who is allegedly innocent. So, does Eric Robinson have clean hands in the acts that transpired on October 5th, 2017? No, he does not. Because he helped Isabella dispose of the body. And you will hear a lot of evidence about what transpired that day. You will not hear a whole lot of questioning from myself or Mr. Stadler with regard to the cleaning up and the disposing of Mr. Wilcox's body. So, as the state said already, Ms. Tagliarini was charged. So on October 5th is when Mr. Wilcox sadly died. Ms. Tagliarini gives 5 different statements under oath to the police. Finally, on October 14th, they confront her with all of the inconsistencies, because as they start pulling surveillance and doing things, they start to realize how what she had told them was not necessarily true. For example, I'll give you one example. She says that...
Judge, I'm going to object this to argument.
The evidence will
Modify-
show...
Yes,
The evidence-
this is, go ahead.
The evidence will show that she told the police that immediately after leaving the house, that her and Eric Robinson, with the body, with Mr. Wilcox's body in the bed of the Ford F-150, and I know I'm throwing a lot of details out to you, and this will all kind of come together as you start hearing the evidence, that they took that vehicle to the courthouse with the body in it, and that she waited, had no phone, he had taken her phone. What comes out in the next week or so, after the lead detective pulls the footage from the Publix right down the street, is that no, they were not in the F-150. In fact, Isabella Tagliarini was actually driving Eric Robinson's Cadillac to Publix. And the surveillance shows that Ms. Tagliarini has her phone the entire time and her purse, and that when Mr. Robinson comes to meet up with her at the Publix so they can leave, they're hugging, they're kissing, they're holding hands. Far different portrayal than what she told the police originally. You will hear that just 2 weeks before, Isabella Tagliarini and Nicholis Wilcox, right? You heard about this marriage contract. We'll hear more about that later, where the two of them drafted up some strange document about how in love they are, and they pricked their fingers and sealed it with blood. But you'll hear that just 2 weeks before, there was some turmoil where Mr. Tagliarini actually, I'm sorry, see, I just did it. Mr. Wilcox, Nicholis Wilcox, had kicked Ms. Tagliarini out of the house. You will hear that she was charged, as the state just told you.
Yes.
as the state told you, was arrested for her involvement in this case on October 14th. Right? She was charged with accessory after the fact. So that is, what, 14 minus 5, 9 days? 9 days as they began to investigate and see further what was transpiring. Accessory after the fact, you will hear, is a crime that someone could be punished up to 30 years in prison. But you will hear that she wound up pleading to taking a plea that the state offered her to change the charge to something much lower, where her exposure will only be up to 5 years, and where she will tell you she doesn't expect to do any jail time at all. So, at the end of this trial, after you've viewed all of the evidence, I am sure that you will find Mr. Robinson not guilty of murder in the second degree. And I know that because the evidence does not support it. Thank you.
All right, if we can move that, thanks.